Okay. We since we have an intimate group here, I'm going to seize the opportunity to treat this a little bit like the taping for maybe a bonus episode of Poetry in America, because we can.
Yeah, why not?
Because we can. And so I'm so thrilled to be here with you, Alynda.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Talk with you, and as you and I we spoke a week or so ago, and I've been reading you and listening to you and reading about you, and I thought I would begin to kind of set a theme for this conversation that we may or may not want to follow, but it's one that's interesting to me, and I think that may be on the minds of others. I am often asked, well, what's the difference between poetry and lyrics? You know,
it's a spicy question.
it's a very spicy question, and people often ask it with hostility.
Yes, for sure.
And uncertainty and anxiety.
Yeah.
And I don't have. I have a television show called Poetry in America. People think I have the answer. I'm gonna solve it for them.
Totally.
And instead, what it feels like to me is, it's so interesting to think about words and music.
Yeah.
Words without music. Words with a little music. Words with a lot of music. And so, just to begin.
Yeah.
How do you're a writer, you're clearly a writer and a poet and a music maker.
Uh-huh.
How do you think of the relationship of lyrics to poetry?
Well, I respect poetry so much, and I think I've been afraid to call myself a poet, and I often lead with songwriter. But I do think there's a major difference in that I've written songs that sometimes the lyrics just come out and they flow with the melody, and the melody serves the words, and it's not a lot of like crafting. It's kind of a flow, and I don't think that the lyrics could stand on their own. They need the music, they need to be sung. And then there are songs of mine that I think could be on a page and could be read, and I feel like I did enough, not work on them, but intention with them, that like they could have this other life on the page, So I think that's the major difference to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about that as I've been looking at your work, and we're going to share a music video where everyone will be able to really look at the words, as well as listen to the beautiful song. And you absolutely have pieces where there are clusters of images that are speaking to each other, that are telling a story, that are communicating an idea.
Yeah.
And then you'll say, yeah, or baby.
Yeah, totally.
When you do that, baby, you had me thinking about I love you, yeah.
Totally.
Like, what is that, yeah? And that, the role of the YEAH when we say yeah it's important, but we know somehow that the word is a vehicle for an outpouring of feeling.
Yeah, or an energy or an attitude. It's like when you say like like that is rock and roll. That is like a sexiness and a swagger, and it's just it's like a primal sound, or like a yeah. And I think it leads me to street poetry, though, which is really what I grew up loving, growing up in New York City. That was what was so exciting about like Nuyorican poetry, like Puerto Rican poetry based in New York City, was I was reading the page and I was like, this sounds like my dad talking on the corner to his friends, and that was so exciting to see it written down and to give it this, to put it kind of like in the history books.
Well, there's something about the prestige of the page.
Yeah.
that can have a pretty negative effect. It, it can intimidate. It can make you feel like, well, the page is the throne. The page is the pantheon. Where what, and if you can actually hear the street talk, you can hear the accents of the place on the page. The page is, I think, being elevated, and maybe that's why you like that. You know, this really does fascinate me, so I'm going to go a little further with it. You know, if I know I've read that Allen Ginsberg was an important poet for you, and Allen Ginsberg is very wordy.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many. He's got a lot to say, and on the other hand, in many of his poems, it's really just chant, right? Yeah. And the words are somehow filling in this great exhalation of feeling and voice. Yeah. And then you'll see a poet like and a great singer like Patti Smith, and Patti Smith will say, you know, I'm a writer. Yeah. I'm a writer, and Patti Smith will now say, I don't really have much of a voice. And so I find it quite fascinating in looking at your work to be thinking, you know, as I'm song by song, lyric by lyric, about the language as it's communicating ideas or giving us visual images, and the language that it's just sort of writing feeling.
The mantra or the chanting really speaks to me. I think as a kid growing up, I felt like I had a lot to say, and I had so much that I was witnessing, and that's why punk rock spoke to me, you know, because I felt like that was a chant state, or a state where people were channeling something and communicating something. So then
Let's pause. So when you were a kid, so when was that? Let's place us in time.
Totally. I was a freshman in 2001. So
freshman in college?
No, freshman in high school. Yeah.
Freshman. Okay.
Yeah, and so
college was the road, I think.
Definitely. Yeah, I say that my college was like New Orleans, like Jackson Square. Yeah. My high school was actually Tompkins Square Park, you know. But so
2001, you're a freshman in high school.
Yeah, when the Twin Towers fell, it was my first week of high school. So that sets the stage for a whole generation, and I think we're finally starting to get some consciousness about what it's been like to witness all these things and to witness our country. And you know, so for me, that really spoke to me, to witness people and to read people who were not really, there wasn't a lot of editing. It was a lot of like, get ready because I got 6 minutes of something to say, you know?
Well, the magnitude of that catastrophe that you would have as a vulnerable young person experienced that, and as an artist, gives your I don't know, you a toolkit as an artist that is brave and terrified.
Totally.
Right? Where you can write about magnitude. You don't have to write, you know, we know the world is precarious and fragile. We know cities are, you know, seem eternal.
Especially New York City. Growing up in New York City, it was like nothing makes this town shut down. So that was a big moment as a kid to recognize that adults don't necessarily know what's going on, and that things do halt, and that life is precious and precarious, you know? So
you had a lot to say, you said. And I've read that you know, wanted to be a poet. A person who has a lot to say becomes a poet.
Yeah.
So what did that mean to you?
Well, also slam poetry was having a really wonderful moment at the time. So that, I think, made a lot of sense to me because I loved music, but I didn't really know how to play any instrument. So when I saw slam poetry, it made immediate sense to me. And it felt like direct lineage to the beat poets. You know, I loved that there was rhythm, and I loved that it was performed, and, you know, I really wanted to say things out loud. It felt like something that my body needed. And I hadn't gotten in touch with my singing voice. So it felt like this natural thing. So that's the world that I kind of, you know, played around in and learned from.
And did you have friends? Were you, you know, you describe yourself as a kind of outsider, queer, you know, part of the Riff Raff.
Totally.
And yet those collective experiences of slam, poetry gatherings, places of community. Was there community for you?
Definitely. And, you know, I still felt like an outsider in those worlds, and I thought and I felt very honored to, that was my early experiences of being like, I'm a representative of the people getting drunk in Tompkins Square Park. You know, like I felt, even as like a 15-year-old, like when I'd show up at the poetry gathering or workshop, that I was like, well, I'm bringing my people here, and that's what I'm writing about. I'm writing about the people struggling with addiction and, you know, my friends that are runaways and how we're trying to open up squats. And, you know, like, that was my beginning stages of feeling like, oh, I'm here to represent all that I've witnessed and these people that I think are really important, you know?
And that really is, you had mentioned the beats, that really is the beat ethos that you know, that was really important for punk artists as well, where beat, you know, what does beat mean? It stands for, maybe it's about the beat, about its musicality, but also it's about being beat, being down on your luck. And the kind of depth and resonance that comes. So you were a little 15-year-old, there you are.
And it really resonated with me. That's what I was seeing, and that's what I was drawn to. And, you know, I came from a family, my father was a Vietnam veteran and a jazz musician. So, and he was very open with me at a young age. You know, I laugh because I'm like, wow, that was a young age to hear about these things, but I feel so lucky that he was very open about his experiences and his trauma, and being Puerto Rican and what that meant. And
in the Bronx.
And he grew up in Chelsea, but
He grew up in Chelsea, and then you ended up downtown.
And I grew up in the Bronx, and I would take this pilgrimage and on the train that would take like 2 hours, on the very local train, the one. And I got down there thinking I made it so far to the Lower East Side, and my dad would be like, I used to smoke weed with the jazz musicians like outside Tompkins. You don't know what you're talking about, you know? So it was just like, damn, you've done everything before me.
That seems a really important, I mean, you're just telling it as a piece of your biography, a journey, but it's an archetypal journey in a way, from an outer borough to into the city where art is.
Totally.
And you probably saw yourself in that.
Yeah, and it's funny, you know, it's a subway train, but then I hear Woody Guthrie, I start meeting all these punk rock kids who are riding freight trains around America, and I'm like, well, I'm already riding a train. I know I love riding trains, you know, like it felt very obvious to me in a way that continuing with school and trying to be like a functional person in society at the time felt impossible to me, you know.
So you left. So I mean that we need to hear that part of the story.
a big part of the journey.
Tompkins Square wasn't doing it all for you. And so what happened then?
Well, I met with, you know, I was meeting a lot of other kids that were doing this stuff, riding freight trains and hitchhiking. And so I was getting a bit of an education about it already, and they asked me if I wanted to go. So I left shortly after my 17th birthday and went out to the West Coast and, you know, just spare changed for money because I wasn't playing music at the time, which was also like very normal to me at the time because I was with all these kids that like, that's what you do. And, you know.
And you were literally jumping trains, freight trains.
Very like Woody Guthrie told us to do this. That's what we're doing, you know. Oh Brother Where Art Thou had just come out, and everybody was just like, have you heard the Big Rock Candy Mountain? You know, like that's like, we were so out of touch with like mainstream music at the time. We were just, that was like our jam, was that. So
I read, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you because I've read wonderful things I want to share. I read that you said you were too cute to get arrested.
That's what I thought.
You thought?
Yeah, that's what I thought. Until like me, you know, I eventually met these musicians in New Orleans when I ended up there. And, you know, it was a beautiful time, but it was also a time of a lot of fear, obviously. You know, you're a small person out in the world, sleeping outside, trying to make sure you're safe in any way you can. But my brain is also very young at the time and doesn't fully understand danger. But I feel it, you know. And when I met these kids in New Orleans who were like, you could sing, like, here's this washboard, just bang on it, literally. And I felt like, wow, here's the poetry coming back, you know, like, here's the beat coming back. It was very, like, I can do this. This is simple. I also had this thing of, like, I'm Puerto Rican, I got rhythm, like, you know. And it felt like, here's the beginning of something, because even though I knew this was the road I was supposed to be on, asking for money on the street, and there, you know, it was very difficult, of course, and I felt like I was paying my dues, but I had this like Bob Dylan, I can't go home this way type of thing. It's like, I gotta go out there and like, I gotta prove to my family that this was worth it, you know, I gotta prove that there was a calling behind this. So when I met these musicians in New Orleans and we started this hobo band, that was when it all started to make sense, and it started to feel so much less the danger part, and all the drugs that were around, all of that started to drift away and became so focused on music. Mm-hmm. And that's really what I think saved me, was finding those people in that community and them just being extremely supportive. And, you know, there were people from all different walks of life in the band. Some were classically trained pianists, and some were like, I just picked up this fiddle for $30. Yeah, here's a washboard. So we're all sharing our skills, and they would be like, we like those little songs that you come up with. You know, folk music felt like such a natural way to put put poetry to music.
Pause on that for a second. We're gonna watch a very beautiful video, music video of you. But I just want to pause for a second and note the great power of immaturity and what a source it is for poets. Yeah. They say of poets, poets do their best work young. Wordsworth said, it all comes from the nakedness, the vulnerability of the child. And hearing your story, I guess I must be very immature myself. And at 65, I'm not about to grow up, but that you were okay. You rode the rails. You ran off and joined the circus as kids of a different generation did. And you came of age by yourself with the help of all these songs and ancestors. Yeah, it's very moving.
Yeah,
immaturity. Yay!
Totally. Just this like. It's this bravery, and it's also admitting when you're scared, but doing it anyway. Being like, I'm terrified. I'm not necessarily like a brave person. Every time I got on a train, my friends needed to be like, get on the fucking train. Like, we gotta go. And I'd be like, I don't want to get hurt. And like, it's too late,
Jump.
Yeah, so it wasn't like I was so brave. I was just like, I want to live. And I felt,
that lovely elixir of fear. And that is where rock and roll comes from.
Exactly.
It is where so much great art comes from.
Yeah.
And it's so, children, it's so hard for them to get that. It's so hard to run away and join the circus these days.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm recommending it, but I'm very moved by it. So I think that what we've talked about so far has really given context for
Totally.
this video, this wonderful music video, and the music video as a genre is, I mean, I feel like you're making important, you're pressing some really interesting boundaries there, and I really love it. So let's watch it. This is Colossus of Rhodes, and it's Alynda.
Quick now, I hear gunfire, caught somewhere in the space between. Do you love me? Do you love me? Everything is advancing. I love to see you out dancing. There's women up in the mountains. We could be up there if we could get up there. Say goodbye to America. I wanna see it dissolve. I can't be a poster boy for the great American fall. Now I'm out and I'm prowling. You make me wanna start growling. You will live forever as this bombshell in my mind. Dangerous, but I want to see you undress. Wrap you up in the bomb shelter of my feather bed. Eileen, I must be living twice. Colossus of Rhodes, buzz blur in the night. Cowboy hat and a cigarette. Grease marker in my leather vest. Let's go paint the oil cans. Write our names on a grain of sand. No one will remember us like I will remember us. Meet me down in the Castro. We'll pretend it's 1985. Before we were a twinkle in our great grandfather's eyes. Children forever. In the end of the night, baby, of the night, baby, of the night, in the night, baby, in the night, in the night, baby, in the night.
Yeah.
Directed by Jeff Pearlman.
Okay,
incredible.
gotta talk to Jeff.
Oh my God! It's
Yeah.
just our first video together, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, just a magical experience.
And it's such a beautiful song.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Everyone could see Children Forever, right? That's the beauty of that, and the risk of that. At the risk of being pedantic, I'm going to be a little bit pedantic. Used to be a professor. It's a hard habit to lose. Whether or not you put this on the cold page, which I don't think it needs to go on the cold page. We don't have to. Billy Collins has a poem where he makes fun of that idea that poetry is this this scary thing that you have to decode, and he said and he says it's not like you should tie the poem to a chair and beat it with a hose so that it tells you what it means. And so I wouldn't want to put these words, on that page, and I don't really want to be decoding them now, but I do want to reflect with you on some of the chains of imagery.
Totally.
The gunfire, the bombshell, the bomb shelter.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is a feather bed. And there is a craft, right, that comes that has to go into that.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be coming from your unconscious. You might have a very crafty unconscious. But if those if it's worth it to you, could we just talk about
Of course.
imagery,
Yeah.
the imagery, because you like the French symbolists, like the punk poets you like, images are carrying a lot of power.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think when you mentioned ancestors before, this song and a lot of my songs, they come from honoring the dead. And Colossus of Rhodes started coming to me because I had heard the news about the Club Q shooting. And it struck me so much, to hear about another tragedy of queer people gathering and to be unsafe and to lose people and what it means when we lose people, what it means when, like, how many people are affected. And it just opened up this, like, I had this image of, like, I want to make a snow globe, or I want to make a fort that I can just say, this is a little 3-minute time where we're safe. And these are the things that I find beautiful. And trying to create this, like, trying to create safety in a world that is so violent.
But it's also it's like a detonating feelingscape, right? It's the inner life.
Yeah.
You're not making yourself safe. This poem is not sealed against explosions.
Yeah. It's very much we are living in this time, but there's also, like, a desire in it and a sexiness. And, like, that's really where Eileen came into play.
Eileen Miles.
Yeah.
Poet Eileen Miles.
And, this idea of I must be living twice. I had that book by my bedside, and I just would open it up and read it every night. And this idea of, like, we live in this violent time and we are unsafe, but we can still honor the dead, and we can also still, like, be sexy. We can still have this desire, and
that's sexy's a really important category for you.
Yeah, and it's a new one that I'm playing around with, by the way.
Yeah, I see that. And they're old women, and I know sexy, the ways in which, what is it? You're not, I wouldn't call you aging exactly.
I mean,
but
I am.
What is the continuity between our young selves, our freight hopping selves, and these later selves, and how is sexuality a way of not containing violence, but dealing with intensity?
Totally. And queerness is just really, it's another theme of what saved my life, and to play with gender and to queer aging and to queer, especially in this video, a lot of what we were doing, we went to a town called Tucumcari, New Mexico, and we were there for about a week, living in an old motel called the Palomino, and meeting all these local people and just having, like, this wonderful time.
This is you in the band?
Me and Jeff, the director. And we talked a lot about, I was like, I see these pictures of James Dean in a cowboy hat, and I see River Phoenix in my own private Idaho, and I think about these, like, sad boys out in the dusty road. And they look too pretty to work, but, like, they are, I guess, but they look rough and tumble, but they also still have this, like, beautiful sensitivity, and they look like they're about to cry at any moment. And I was like, I just really want to embody some of that. That is this archetype that is very American, and I really wanted to place myself in it. And that was a part of this road of, like, welcoming sexiness and desire and, in a dangerous place. I think it really, like, changed me.
And that really
on a molecular
is
level.
Archetypal.
Yeah.
Right? Out on the trail.
Totally. And I think it's really interesting.
The outlaw
to be, like,
tradition.
Totally.
The I'm sorry, I'm thinking of guys fleeing the police.
Yeah.
All those.
The bandits, the, like, vagabonds, and I thought it was really important for me to be like, well, why not me? Why not me step into that role? Why not me? So I just feel like it really played into the lyricism of collecting these. It isn't even about, like, creating a safe space. It's about creating, like, a collage or a memory book that I can be like, this is what makes me feel alive, you know?
Which
and
includes feeling my losses.
yes, and that's why it ends with talking about the Castro, because I was reading a book called It Was Vulgar and It Was Beautiful, by Jack Lowry, I believe is his name, all about Grand Fury and ACT UP, and during the AIDS crisis. And it was another experience of really trying to take in what it means when we lose people, so many people, and we lose their potential and what they could have made. And, you know, I felt this really intense feeling of I'm in lineage with these artists that I never got to meet. And, you know.
And this is the most traditional posture for a poet, too, even as an outlaw.
Yeah.
Even if you are wearing the garb and trying on many identities, including the identity of the cowboy, and, you know, all of that, you know, a poet is someone who holds on to the past, who slows time.
Yeah, and communicates with the dead.
And communicates with the dead, and claims and acknowledges lineage and forebears.
Totally.
Right, so that's the tension that this song and your work holds itself to, and even the discipline that you know, I'm young and reckless, and I'm completely accountable.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. Could I ask you about the musical traditions?
Totally.
I mean, you're a Puerto Rican kid from the Bronx, and you've projected yourself into and become we don't use the word master, you know, are in command of a set of genres that are associated with the West, with the country. You know, is it that America's more America in the West? Is it that, you know, how do you think about those geographies?
Yeah, there is a lot of tension in that too. You know, like, I've thought a lot about, people always ask me what my biggest influence is, and I feel like the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed is such an example of like my roots, you know? So it's kind of like meeting Woody Guthrie with Lou Reed, you know, going out and seeing America, seeing parts of America that I was like, I'm sure that New York isn't the center of the world, you know, like everybody's telling me it is, it feels like it is, but, you know, when I left, in some ways I felt like I was from a very small town, because I was like, I don't even know how to drive, like, but to go out and suddenly be stuck in Laramie, Wyoming, you know, to go see all these other parts of the country and eventually the world, it felt like these other melodies were really speaking to me, these Western melodies, these folk melodies, but it became very clear that my job was to bring my Velvet Underground experience to that, you know, because anywhere I went, I still had this education in Tompkins Square Park, you know, hanging out with like ex-Hells Angels when I'm like 14, not understanding what that meant, you know, stuff like that. So bringing that to a folk melody felt also very beat, you know. Yeah.
Oh, that's true. And there are those connecting,
totally,
those tunnels between folk and beat, obviously, right, in the village. Yeah, I mean, the whole archaeology that I begin to do when I just listen to one of your songs into music history, into literary history, is so exhilarating. I'm wondering too about your voice, because you actually have a wonderful voice. You didn't think of yourself as a singer, and I'm wondering if your voice led you in any way toward particular kinds of music, toward roots or Americana. You're like, oh, I sound more like Lucinda Williams. I don't know. You don't really sound like, but I sound more like Nora Jones.
Totally. Yeah, you know, Lucinda's a big one. Gillian Welsh was a big one. And then also, because of my family, you know, and the era that they grew up in, my aunt that raised me was born in 42. So doo-wop music was huge to me. And you know, Ronnie Spector, or hearing like that type of music, I felt really worked with my voice. That was something I was like, oh, this is a genre that makes sense to me. And it was really fun to learn those songs and sing those songs. So kind of blending that with.
And did New Orleans, was New Orleans music
for
culture?
Sure.
So what, you've already said, you know, there was this band, you all got together and taught each other. But I'm thinking about just sort of the musical sophistication of the city.
Oh, yeah. You know, like Irma Thomas was another huge one. And a lot of the music that Alan Toussaint produced. This really swampy, incredible rock and roll doo-wop music that eventually grows into a lot of different things like funk. And, you know, New Orleans is an amazing place to learn how to play music because it's so ritualistic, and the music is community action. Mm-hmm. And that is another thing that was really foundational for me. It was very punk to me to be like, oh yeah, you write songs and you play music for when someone passes away, or when we're celebrating something, or when we're protesting something. Mm-hmm. It was like all of the music, even if it was party music,
it makes something happen in a social world.
Yes, it was very.
And you know, the most edgy moment here is about America dissolving.
Yeah.
I want to see you dissolve.
Yeah.
And there's I used the word accountability before, but holding America to account, holding a larger society to account, seems also part of what you're working on.
Yeah, and to also force us to imagine more, to force, like, to be, you know, talk about like tying someone to a chair, to be like, we must imagine a different future. We cannot rely on what we're being told is the only thing, because it seems very bleak, and it's not really living. It's not resistance, you know, and that's a big part of it.
But you also have a kind of quiescence in there with, I'm going to go off with the grandma, you know, let's go off with the old women in the hills. I feel quite comforted by that.
Totally.
And very invited by that.
Yeah.
And I liked that you were imagining that, which is, after all, where we are all going.
Yeah.
You know, if we're lucky, we get to be a grandma on a porch.
For sure. Yeah. It really felt like, it's the options that you think of when you're so afraid, you know, of, do I run away and try to be safe with the old women, or do I try to build something new and burn it down? To just like place all the options that I hear us all talking about right now, you know, like, and to not even say like, oh, I pledge allegiance to any of these ideas, to just say these are the conversations that are happening in a world that is very terrifying. But the point to always be, let's talk about it, let's imagine it, let's, you know.
And that's that just as one version of what a poem is. It's not something you pledge allegiance to. It's often language that has so many possibilities in it, and allows itself to have those tensions in it.
And to write in a way that, you know, to feel like I want a reaction. I want a visceral reaction. I want someone to say, I don't like the idea of that.
Dissolving.
Yeah, and to be like, okay, good, you're feeling something. Let's talk about it, you know? Like, that really excites me, because I feel, in music, I feel like we're becoming it's becoming so much more industrial, you know? It's becoming so much more part of a machine that is meant to be lo-fi beats that you study to in the background, as opposed to music that's making you feel.
That's from a person to persons.
Yeah.
I have a last question about this, and I'm going to open it up to some questions in a minute, but I want to ask you this question, and then I would just want to show a little bit of another video, which you will, I promise you, enjoy. And what was that question? I forget it. So I'm going to, maybe I will get it back. If I don't, I've talked too much anyway, so it's fine. Let's just play, like 90 seconds of this beautiful. This is Alibi.
de-facto gain to the destiny I grieve. Marching towards the
Thank you. I know you want to hear the rest of it. You can. Yeah, it's so beautiful. My question before was about the use of the word "you," which, is poets have been using "you" forever.
Yeah.
And who is that? And we want to say, oh, well, that's the girl. That's her girlfriend, or that's their girlfriend.
Yeah.
And it's often something much bigger
Yeah.
than that.
Especially with this song. This is the first song on the album, so the album, The Past Is Still Alive, opens up with the word "you." I felt like that was really important for what I was going through with making this record, especially with grief being such a big theme. I really wanted it to talk directly to the listener because I was at such a fragile place in my life, and I felt like I was putting it all on the line, with this record. I was in a place where I was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I might be too sensitive to do this. I can't be a TikTok star, like all these things that you think of. And so making this record and opening up with this song felt very important to say, I'm talking right to you. And also, you is me, of course, to be like, to give myself a pep talk of like, you don't have to die if you don't want to die. Like, let's try to get through this. Let's hold on a little longer. But to also directly talk to the listener in knowing that this is a universal experience. So we all reach these points of like, I can't do this shit anymore, whatever form that comes in,
Yeah. One other quick observation, and then time for some questions. I love the way the words appear, not on a cold, static page, but in a way where you go, well, is that really? I mean, how many yeses are there? Really?
Yeah.
Grief, is it like where the language itself can accordion, get bigger or smaller in the way a performance will transform language. Because I make video about poetry, I am especially moved by the typography, by the use of language as a visual element here. And so last question and then a few questions. How involved were you in that?
I'm very focused on the aesthetics. So I gave the folks working on that video a lot about talking about zines and how I grew up with punk rock zines, DIY zines, Xeroxed stuff that, and I felt like that was really important, that I wanted people to feel like it was cut and paste and it was really by hand.
Yeah.
But there were some choices that they made that I felt, especially with the grieve. I love how it feels like grief is raining on you.
Yeah.
It's just like, or it's popping up everywhere. It's like a whack-a-mole. You're just like, there's grief again. So there were moments like that really surprised me,
Yeah.
But I'm really big on fonts and texture.
Yeah.
And that really, through like my love of film and also from punk, I think.
Yeah, and you're
comes
not
from
just,
that.
I mean, you are working in multiple media. You are working as a writer, as a songwriter, as a performer, and as a visual artist.
Yeah.
And collaborator in these videos in an incredibly powerful way. So, questions, thoughts?
Cool.
Hi, my name's Brett, and I was very lucky to first be introduced and fall in love with your band. I think it was at the 2013 Newport Folk Festival.
Oh, cool.
And it was your performance last night was gorgeous, and this has been so special to hear you,
Thank you.
speak about your life and your work. But my question is about place. And, you're, as we have heard, you're of Puerto Rican descent, grew up in the Bronx, spent a lot of time on trains, tour now, and are home-based in New Orleans. So how does place kind of change or dictate your songwriting, not necessarily in the way it sounds, but how you write and what you write about?
That's a great question, thanks. I think there's a sense of of feeling not quite ever like I'm at home. And I think that's a big theme in the writing. I think growing up in New York and not coming from, generational wealth, my family was not very wealthy at all when it comes to money. So pretty immediately I was like, I cannot afford to live here. Neither can any of you, So it was this feeling of loving New York, but also being very practical of I can't afford to stay here. And then going to a place like New Orleans and feeling like I could build a life there, but also New Orleans is so strong in its history, in its generational tradition. You're never from New Orleans if you're not from New Orleans, And I loved that feeling. I loved being very humbled by it and being like, I'm going to sit and shut up and listen to what you guys have to say as a city, But it does create this feeling of, I don't, like a Woody Guthrie, I don't got a home in this world anymore. So then it opens up a lot of possibility of everywhere becomes my makeshift home, or everywhere there's a feeling of searching for it. I think that's a lot of this like child thing that will always be there, is kind of being like, are you my mom? Are you my friends? Are you like, is this my home? Always thinking, can I build something here is a part of it. Yeah. Hey.
I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts on AI in the music industry? Do you see it as like a threat to creativity, or is it a tool to help artistic, like getting your thoughts out, or like what do you think about AI in music?
I think it's both. I've played around with a lot of apps because especially I don't, I play guitar and I play some piano and banjo, but I really love writing to beats, to like rhythm, because I think it makes me write differently. And for, AI in that way is really helpful. Like there's some apps that you can record something into your phone and then it picks up the BPM and it gives you a bunch of different possibilities of a beat, So something like that is an incredible tool. And I try to be not precious or a purist, because I see a lot of my friends be very, very traditional, and I think it can impede the creativity. But I also am really afraid, about just the human connection of a songwriter and a singer. I'm afraid of that just not being valued by our society and as a whole. And I think it's medicine, and I think it's really important. And even though we could trick it and do something different and take that out and it could like sound the same, that's where I think, I think it's more about us as a society and a culture agreeing on what is valuable and saying, okay, we're going to use these tools, but we're in charge of the tools. We're not going to let the tools come in charge of us, and we're going to decide that these things are really important, these connections are important. So then when we are driven with that vision, we can just use them. We don't have to be so afraid because we're not throwing away artists or, a really important spiritual connection that is like human to human. So, yeah.
We need to wrap up. Can we do one more question? One more quick one right here. Yeah.
Damn, I work for the Aspen Institute. It's hard to be quick when you get paid to talk. I'm so moved. I wanted to ask you about the name. I think for a lot of us in the world, the Hurray for the Riff Raff just resonates so much. In some ways, it's like no matter how I worked for the Gates Foundation, and every time my badge worked to get into the building, I was like, damn, they let the Riff Raff back in again.
Yeah.
Like so, you may have talked about it because I got here a little late, but and also just feedback you've heard from folks about the name, because I think there's something there. And I have a bunch of other questions about New Orleans, and I'll like all the refugees who John Cleary played here at Belly Up last week, and he's a British guy who found Andrews Osborne, who some of your stuff reminds me of him. It feels like there's actually, when you feel like Riff Raff and you don't have a home, New Orleans is the closest it gets. That's what Andrews Osborne told me.
Yeah,
he didn't say Riff Raff, but
it's very much a port town. there's definitely sometimes a weathered, okay, we're used to the people coming in all the time and finding themselves here, I feel very honored to be like allowed to have the time there to like find myself. But the name, I thought of it when I was very young. I thought of it when I was like 18. And it felt very obvious to me. I didn't want it to be my own name. I wanted it to feel like a band, even though the project is me and my writing. And it's really grown. What's really funny is I'm learning more and more how American it is. Because as I go around the world, people are like, what is this Riff Raff? And just like, the outsiders, the underdogs. I'm like, keep trying. I'm like a thesaurus of like, this, until they're like, oh, okay. And some people are like, that sounds bad, like you're just like criminals, or I'm like, kind of, but like the harmless kind, trying to explain it. It's funny how with time it's become such, I realize what an American idea it is, the Riff Raff. But it feels good as I grow and get older to keep it kind of keeps me honest, It's a name that I feel like if I'm going to celebrate this, then I have to keep checking in with myself and allowing my friends to check me, Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alynda.
Oh, thank you. This is an
pleasure.
honor. Thank you so much.
You all.
Thank you.
Great pleasure. Fabulous.